Hello, fourth graders. We are going to go over this article, and then once we go over this article and you listen to me read it, you'll go and click on the slides in Google Classroom and answer the questions on the slide. And you can either answer those questions directly in the slide or write the answers down in your notebook and then post them as a comment in your Google Classroom assignment and turn it in. All right, so this article is entitled Fight for Women's Rights. 100 years ago, women in the United States won the right to vote thanks to fearless leaders like Alice Paul. Alice Paul sat in a jail cell in Virginia. The year was 1917. The cell was filthy. The blanket on the bed hadn't been washed in months, and the food at the jail was crawling with bugs. Paul's crime? She thought women should be allowed to vote. Women in the United States didn't always have that right. Activists like Paul helped change that, but it took decades of struggle. Where it all began. Paul was born in 1885. Her family belonged to a religious group called the Quakers. They believed that men and women were equals. At the time, not many others shared that view. Paul often tagged along with her mother to women's suffrage meetings, so she knew that women weren't being represented well by the government. How could they be if they weren't allowed to vote for their leaders? Paul's childhood set the stage for her life's work. After college, she became a leader in the American women's suffrage movement. In March 1913, Paul helped organize a protest parade in Washington, D.C. More than 5,000 women marched in the parade. Thousands of men and kids also showed their support, but others were there for a different reason. They disagreed with Paul's views. Angry onlookers hit, tripped, and yelled at the marchers, but it didn't stop them. The parade brought visibility to the suffrage movement, says Krista Niles. She works at the Alice Paul Institute. A tough battle. Over the next few years, Paul wrote letters to Congress, gave speeches, and spread the word about her cause. Then, in 1917, she organized a group of more than 1,000 women to protest at the White House. No one had ever dared to protest outside the president's home before. For 8 hours a day, rain or shine, the women stood silently outside the White House gates, holding signs. Paul insisted that the protests remain nonviolent. After a few months, police began to arrest the women. Although they were standing quietly on the sidewalk, more than 200 suffragists were charged with blocking traffic. That's how Paul ended up in that filthy jail cell. This sign says, Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? Winning the vote. As word spread about their imprisonment, there was a public outcry. The women were eventually released. More importantly, they could no longer be ignored. Feeling pressured, President Woodrow Wilson announced his support for women's suffrage in 1918. 2 years later, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was approved, finally granting women in the U.S. the right to vote. Paul spent the rest of her life, right up until her death in 1977, fighting for equal rights. Alice Paul believed that one person can make a difference, Niles says. You don't have to be wealthy or famous. It comes down to your personal courage. And here's some more facts about voting and the fight for voting rights. Susan B. Anthony, the voting right with Selma and Martin Luther King Jr. And then in 1971, the voting age was lowered from 21 to 18. All right, now you can go back to Google Classroom, open the slides that are there, and then answer those questions.